Hi everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to make a plug for a podcast. There are not a lot of podcasts in the forest analytics and digital forestry space, but definitely check out Kevin Lim's The Digital Forester podcast. I say that because it's a great podcast. Kevin does an excellent job with it. He has a number of guests on that talk about everything from remote sensing to digital forestry, new technologies, all of the above. And I do mention it too because I was recently a guest on Kevin's podcast, and we talk a lot about things related to forestry, technology, and kind of the future. And so definitely check that out if you have a chance. Again, the podcast is The Digital Forester, and you can find it anywhere you find podcasts, and also a video version on YouTube. So enjoy.
Welcome to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Russell. In this podcast, we'll talk about how data and analytics are transforming the forest products industry.
Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about connecting forests and the metaverse. And these two things might not come to mind as immediate connections, but I'd like to talk about a book I recently read and what I think a lot of foresters and people involved in technology and forests can take away from understanding the metaverse. And so last fall, I read a book written by Matthew Ball, which was a very good, popular bestseller. It was called The Metaverse and How It Will Revolutionize Everything. And this book really opened my eyes to really what the metaverse is. It's something you hear a lot about in the news. Companies like Facebook have invested a tremendous amount of dollars into particularly the hardware aspects, with Facebook acquiring Oculus recently, or a few years ago now, but Facebook trying to get into more of the virtual reality and the gaming aspects of the metaverse. And so it's definitely a topic that is in the news regularly and is kind of with mixed thoughts in terms of how it might influence the future, if people are going to be living their personal and professional lives in the metaverse, or if it's just going to be kind of more of a fad that might kind of stick to the gaming and some of the other technologies where it's kind of sitting right now. And so the book was really a great one, and what I want to talk about today is just a couple of takeaways that I got from the book that I think can apply to us working in forestry and in natural resources. And so I think there's a lot that can be taken from understanding really what the metaverse is and what it might mean for us in forestry. And so I did want to start with just a definition of what metaverse is. Certainly there's the Facebook company called Meta, the larger umbrella company of Facebook. And obviously they've taken that from this idea of the metaverse. But what Matthew Ball describes as the metaverse is the following: a massively scaled and interoperable network of real-time rendered 3D virtual worlds that can be experienced synchronously and persistently by an effectively unlimited number of users with an individual sense of presence and with continuity data, such as identity, history, entitlements, objects, communications, and payments. And so that description and that definition is quite a bit lengthy, but it really revolves around three basic components. It's definitely big, so whatever you're talking about is going to be using lots of data at a large scale. It can operate across multiple environments, and so you can think about, what does that mean? Well, that might be kind of related to different softwares that are being accessed. And then it can be accessed in real time. And so that's another big takeaway about how the metaverse is defined, is it can be accessed now, right now, in real time. And so I think if you have those three components in mind, here are a couple of takeaways that you can think about how the metaverse might impact forests and how we work with forests in our everyday work. And so I think one of the things that's brought up in the book is this idea that technologies that support digital twins are on the rise, and that is that there might be something, you might call it a mirror world, or people have called it a digital twin, where there's technology that's replicating something in the physical environment, and it's replicating that in a digital environment. And so an example of this is something like the Google Street View. Many of you might have Googled a place and say, okay, where exactly is that on the street? Let me click on the Street View icon, and it's as if you're driving in a car or just walking down the street, and you can see the storefronts and or anything else that you're looking to find to help find your way. And so you can think about that as a digital twin. And so I think what the book really says is that these digital technologies are rising, these digital twins. And the author brings up a great example with a company called Planet Labs. And so Planet Labs is a digital satellite imagery company collecting data across the Earth at 8 different spectra, and it's collecting those data every day at a 3 by 3 meter resolution. And so what they're really trying to do is Planet Labs is trying to make a digital twin of any attribute about the forest, like forest biomass or forest carbon. And they're trying to do that in near real time because they have these daily data collects that are happening across the system. And so that's a great example of a digital twin. And so obviously a lot of remote sensing technologies and forestry provide something like this. I think what the key thing is here is that it's providing it in near real time. So a daily data download where you might be able to access things and get a sense of, okay, how much that storm that came through yesterday, how much did it impact my forest? Were there trees blown down? Did it impact? Did it lead to mortality? You might be able to think about a tool like Planet Labs is developing through their software to provide some of that digital twin-like product that can be used by analysts and researchers to interact with forests in a virtual environment. And it could be virtual, or it could be something like augmented reality, where kind of the physical world is interfacing with the digital world in some way. And so I think this idea of digital twins is going to be an important one as we look toward the future. The second key aspect I think that's brought up in Matthew Ball's book is that software environments will become more or less interoperable. And that is that, it used to be, you could run one set of software to do something that you needed, and then you might take that data and put it into a different set of software and run something else. Well, this idea that software environments are going to become interoperable is important. And it's really a core part of the metaverse. And so what he really does is describes this as the ability for computer systems or software to exchange and make use of information sent from one to another. And so just an incredible amount of free play, as you might say, between data across multiple systems. And so as an example of this in my own daily work, I work a lot with forestry data sets. I might use Excel to explore a forest inventory data set, say something that's collected, tree diameters, tree heights, species in the field. And then I might bring it into Excel, have a look at it, import it into a program like R to perform some data analysis, some data wrangling techniques, maybe some statistics, and then use those data into a growth and yield model, something like the forest vegetation simulator. And the idea there is to forecast what the forest will look like under maybe different forest management scenarios into the future. And so I think this is important for what we do in forestry, because often, we certainly have proprietary software that we use in forestry, but we also have the ability for data sets to kind of walk and talk with one another. And so I think this is really a big win for open source software because I think it offers more flexibility than does proprietary software in terms of integrating with other software and systems. Or you have the ability to write code based on that open source code that can kind of do what you want. And so that idea of having data that's not necessarily only fitting for one type of software or one type of system is going to be important as we think about and as we take away some ideas from what the metaverse is doing today. The third one I think that comes out of the book is a great section that talks about decentralized autonomous organizations. And so I've written about this in the past, and I know I have a podcast on this as well, and I'll point to that in the notes. But these decentralized autonomous organizations are member-owned communities that operate with a decentralized leadership structure, and they employ some kind of blockchain technology to record transactions. And so many of those transactions might be things written through things like smart contracts. So the idea that you can have a contract that is much more efficient and much more quick to process rather than traditional contracts written through legal parlance. And so an important aspect of these decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, that are out there today. And so I bring this one up, you think, well, what does that have to do with forests? When I think about forest land ownership, when I think about investment in forest lands, these DAOs should be appealing to people that work in the forestry world, because DAOs, first, they're privately owned properties, and many of them have multiple landowners. Certainly, if you think of forests as being owned by lots of different family forest owners on an individual parcel, there might not just be one person. In fact, there's more often more than one person that owns the land or is making the decisions based on the land. And especially when you have multi-generations of families, I think that things like DAOs can be structured in a way that can really provide a decentralized leadership of that property, in terms of if you're thinking about stuff like harvesting timber or enrolling in a carbon market. If you use a DAO approach, it could help, and I think it could assist in the forestry world when you have multiple landowners on the same piece of land. And I think, too, it could help, obviously, with more corporate ownerships of land and of forest land. Certainly all those corporate ownerships are owned by companies, but those companies have boards of directors and things like that have voting powers. And so you can think about a DAO structure as being appealing to them as well. I think the same goes for land trusts and other conservation-oriented organizations. This idea of DAOs and what they're doing in the world of land ownership, I think foresters and anyone that has to deal with real estate and forestry should be having a look at. So again, DAOs I think are important and an option I think that is being used in the metaverse, and kind of the people that are playing and have their feet wet in the metaverse, and I think we should be looking at it in forestry as well. And so there you have it. I think those three things are things that I really took away from the book. I'll have a link to the book if you're interested in reading it. It's a New York Times bestseller, a great book that shows what the metaverse is and what it could be. And I think it's just a great read to kind of understand the future and understand, where your professional and where your personal life might fit into a metaverse-driven future. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. For more information on how data and analytics can empower your organization, visit arbor-analytics.com.